The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Min-jun pushed his cleaning cart down the marble corridors of Stellar Corporation's 42nd floor. At 28, he possessed an unassuming presence that made him nearly invisible to the executives who hurried past in their tailored suits. His gentle eyes and soft-spoken demeanor had earned him respect among the building's maintenance staff, but to the corporate elite, he was merely part of the scenery. In the break room, a group of junior executives huddled around their phones, snickering. Park Soo-jin, the marketing department's queen bee, scrolled through dating profiles with malicious glee. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her designer coffee cup as she concocted her latest scheme. "Look at this pathetic janitor," she whispered to her colleagues, nodding toward Min-jun as he quietly emptied wastebaskets. "Always so serious, so lonely. I bet he's never even been on a real date." Her accomplice, Kim Tae-ho, grinned wickedly. "What if we set him up? Create a fake profile, get some girl to meet him, then film the whole disaster." The group erupted in suppressed laughter, their cruelty masked by expensive perfume and designer clothing. They began crafting their elaborate prank, unaware that their conversation carried through the thin walls to where Min-jun continued his work, his shoulders tensing slightly at their words. Unknown to them all, CEO Lee Jae-wook had arrived early that morning, his presence unannounced as he conducted one of his rare walkthroughs of the building. The 35-year-old heir to the Stellar Empire moved like a shadow through his own company, observing the true nature of his employees when they believed no one important was watching. Soo-jin's plan unfolded with calculated precision. She created a fake dating profile using photos of a beautiful model, crafting messages designed to appeal to someone lonely and hopeful. The fictional woman, Ji-hai, expressed interest in meeting for coffee at the upscale cafe in the building's lobby. Min-jun's reaction to the unexpected message was heartbreakingly genuine. His face lit up with a shy smile as he read the kind words on his phone during his lunch break. For the first time in months, hope flickered in his tired eyes. He spent his meager savings on a new shirt, carefully pressed his best pants, and even visited a barbershop for a proper haircut. The conspirators positioned themselves strategically around the cafe, phones ready to capture every moment of humiliation. They had arranged for Ji-hee to never show up, leaving Min-jun waiting alone while they documented his disappointment for their entertainment. As the appointed time approached, Min-jun sat nervously at a corner table, checking his watch repeatedly. He had arrived 30 minutes early, too anxious to wait at home. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed his hair and adjusted his collar, practicing conversation starters under his breath. The cafe filled with the usual afternoon crowd of executives and clients, their expensive suits and confident laughter creating a stark contrast to Min-jun's humble presence. He seemed to shrink into himself as time passed, his initial excitement slowly transforming into the familiar weight of disappointment. Hidden behind a marble pillar, Soo-jin and her friends began recording, their faces twisted with anticipation of the entertainment to come. CEO Lee Jae-wook entered the lobby cafe for his usual afternoon coffee, his presence commanding immediate attention from the staff. Tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to power. His sharp eyes, however, were drawn not to the fawning employees who suddenly straightened their postures, but to the solitary figure sitting hopefully in the corner. He recognized Min-jun immediately. Unlike most executives, Jae-wook made it his business to know every employee in his building, from the highest-ranking vice presidents to the night security guards. He had noticed Min-jun's dedication, the way the young man worked without complaint, often staying late to ensure every surface gleamed. As Jae-wook waited for his order, he couldn't help but observe the scene unfolding. Min-jun checked his phone anxiously, his face cycling between hope and growing concern. The CEO's trained eye also caught the suspicious behavior of the group near the window, their barely contained excitement, and the phones pointed in Min-jun's direction. a cold realization settled in Jae-wook's chest. He had built his empire on reading people, on understanding motivations and detecting deception. The pieces of this cruel puzzle assembled themselves with sickening clarity. His jaw tightened as he recognized Soo Jin among the conspirators, her expression gleeful with malicious anticipation. The cafe's ambient noise seemed to fade as Jae-wook's focus sharpened. He had witnessed corporate politics, backstabbing, and ambition throughout his career. But this casual cruelty toward an innocent man struck something deeper. His own lonely childhood, spent in boarding schools while his parents built their business empire, resonated with Min-jun's isolated figure. An hour passed, and Min-jun's hope gradually crumbled into resignation. He sat straighter, trying to maintain his dignity, as curious glances from other patrons began to feel like judgment. His phone remained silent except for the phantom vibrations of his desperate imagination. The carefully rehearsed conversations died on his lips as reality set in. Soo Jin's group could barely contain their laughter, whispering commentary as they captured every moment of his disappointment. Their phones documented his checking of the time, his glances toward the entrance, the slow slump of his shoulders as understanding dawned. "This is perfect," Soo Jin whispered to Tae-ho. "Look how pathetic he looks. This will be viral by tomorrow." Jae-wook's hands clenched around his coffee cup as he overheard their conversation. The casual cruelty in their voices, the complete lack of empathy for another human being's pain, ignited a fury he rarely allowed himself to feel. His company's success had been built on principles of respect and dignity, values these employees were trampling for their entertainment. Min-jun finally stood, his movements careful and measured to preserve what remained of his dignity. He left a small tip for the waitress, despite having ordered only water, a gesture that spoke to his character even in humiliation. As he gathered his jacket, his eyes briefly met Jae-wook's across the cafe. In that moment, the CEO saw not just an employee, but a man whose gentle spirit was being crushed by the very people Jae-wook paid to represent his company's values. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders as Min-jun walked toward the exit, his head held high despite the cruel laughter echoing behind him. Jae-wook's decision crystallized in an instant. He approached Soo Jin's table with the measured stride of a man accustomed to command, his presence immediately silencing their laughter. The group looked up in shock, their phones quickly disappearing as they recognized their CEO's unmistakable figure. "Ms. Park," his voice carried the quiet authority that had built empires and destroyed careers. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Soo Jin's face drained of color as she stammered. "Mr. Lee, You were just documenting the humiliation of my employee for your entertainment," he finished, his tone cutting through her excuses like ice. "Delete the videos, now." The cafe had fallen silent, other patrons sensing the tension radiating from their table. Tae-ho fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking as he complied with the CEO's demand. The others followed suit, their earlier bravado evaporating under Jae-wook's steely gaze. "Do you understand what you've done?" Jae-wook continued, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the suddenly quiet space. "You've taken a decent man's hope and turned it into your personal entertainment. You violated every principle this company stands for." Soo Jin attempted to salvage the situation. "Sir, it was just a harmless prank. We didn't mean any real harm." "Harmless?" Jae-wook's laugh held no warmth. "You orchestrated the emotional manipulation of another human being. You filmed his pain for your amusement. If this is your definition of harmless, then you have no place in my company." The weight of their actions began to settle on the group as they realized the magnitude of their mistake. Their CEO's reputation for swift justice was legendary, and they had just revealed their true characters in the worst possible way. Within 24 hours, Soo Jin and her accomplices found themselves in human resources, facing termination for conduct unbecoming of Stellar Corporation employees. Jae-wook's decision was swift and absolute, sending a clear message throughout the company about the consequences of workplace cruelty. Min-jun, unaware of the corporate drama unfolding above his pay grade, returned to work the next day with quiet dignity. He had spent the evening processing his disappointment, ultimately choosing to view the failed date as simply another of life's small disappointments, rather than a reflection of his worth. His colleagues in the maintenance department noticed his subdued mood but respected his privacy. Mrs. Choi, the head of housekeeping who had become something of a mother figure to him, left his favorite snacks in his locker without comment. Jae-wook found himself thinking about the incident throughout the day, unable to shake the image of Min-jun's hopeful face transforming into quiet resignation. During his evening review of personnel files, he pulled up Min-jun's employment record, discovering details that painted a picture of remarkable character. The young man had been supporting his elderly grandmother while putting himself through night school for business administration. His supervisor's notes consistently praised his reliability, integrity, and the respect he showed to everyone, regardless of their position. He had never called in sick, never complained about overtime, and had even returned a wallet containing significant cash that he'd found while cleaning. As Jae-wook read these details in his penthouse office, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and success, he felt a profound sense of shame. How had he allowed such a person to become invisible in his own company? How many other Min-juns were quietly suffering while people like Soo-jin thrived? The following morning brought an unusual request to Min-jun's supervisor. The CEO's office had specifically asked for Min-jun to handle the cleaning of the executive floor, a responsibility typically reserved for the most senior maintenance staff. Mrs. Choi delivered the news with barely concealed excitement, sensing opportunity in the unusual assignment. Min-jun approached the 45th floor with his characteristic, quiet professionalism, though his heart rate quickened as he entered the realm of corporate power. The executive floor exuded wealth and influence, from its imported marble floors to its panoramic city views. Jae-wook's assistant, Ms. Yang, greeted him with unexpected warmth and directed him to begin with the conference rooms. As Min-jun worked, he was unaware that the CEO was observing him through the glass walls of his office, noting the meticulous care he took with every surface, the respect he showed for the space and its contents. When Min-jun reached the CEO's office, Jae-wook was waiting. The young janitor paused at the threshold, uncertain whether to proceed. The powerful man behind the massive desk seemed to belong to a different world entirely. "Please come in," Jae-wook said, his voice gentler than Min-jun had expected. "I wanted to speak with you." Min-jun entered carefully, his cleaning supplies suddenly feeling inadequate in the presence of such authority. He had never been this close to the CEO before, and the man's intense gaze made him acutely aware of his humble position. "I understand you had a difficult experience in our cafe yesterday," Jae-wook began, watching Min-jun's face carefully for his reaction. Min-jun's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as he realized his humiliation had somehow reached the CEO's attention. He straightened his shoulders, preparing for what he assumed would be a reprimand for using company facilities for personal matters. "I apologize, sir, if my presence in the cafe was inappropriate. It won't happen again." Jae-wook studied the young man's face, noting the automatic assumption of fault, the readiness to accept blame for something that wasn't his responsibility. It spoke to a lifetime of being made to feel lesser, of accepting crumbs and calling them meals. "You have nothing to apologize for," Jae-wook said firmly. "The inappropriate behavior came from my employees, not from you. They've been terminated." Min-jun's eyes widened in shock. He had no idea that his failed date had been orchestrated, that his disappointment had been someone else's entertainment. The revelation hit him like a physical blow, and Jae-wook watched as understanding and hurt warred across his expressive features. "I don't understand," Min-jun whispered, his voice barely audible. Jae-wook explained the cruel prank with clinical precision, watching as Min-jun processed the information. He saw anger flicker briefly in the young man's eyes before being replaced by something that looked like relief. So she was never real, Min-jun said quietly, more to himself than to Jae-wook. I wondered what I had done wrong. The simple statement revealed so much about Min-jun's character. His first instinct had been to blame himself rather than question the situation. Jae-wook felt something shift in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't experienced since his younger sister's death years ago. "I have a proposition for you," Jae-wook said, moving from behind his desk to sit in the chair across from Min-jun, eliminating the physical barrier between them. "I've reviewed your file. You're studying business administration at night school." Min-jun nodded, uncertain where this conversation was leading. His education was something he pursued quietly, not expecting it to matter to anyone in the corporate world. "Your grades are exceptional, and your supervisor's reports consistently praise your work ethic and integrity. I'm offering you a position in our management training program." The offer hung in the air between them like something too precious to touch. Min-jun stared at Jae-wook, certain he had misheard. People like him didn't receive opportunities like this. There had to be a mistake. "Sir, I don't understand. I'm just a janitor." "You're a man with character, intelligence, and dedication. Those qualities are rarer than you might think in the corporate world." Jae-wook leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I built this company on the principle that talent and integrity matter more than background or connections. I'd like to prove that principle with you." Min-jun's hands trembled slightly as he processed the magnitude of what was being offered. The management training program was legendary within the company, a fast track to executive positions that typically recruited only from prestigious universities. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jae-wook considered his answer carefully. How could he explain that watching Min-jun's quiet dignity in the face of cruelty had reminded him of his own values? How could he articulate that this young man represented everything he had hoped his company would stand for? 3 months later, Min-jun sat in a conference room on the 38th floor, wearing a crisp navy suit that Jae-wook had insisted the company provide. The transformation was remarkable, not just in his appearance, but in his growing confidence as he navigated the complex world of corporate strategy. His fellow trainees, all graduates from elite universities, had initially viewed him with skepticism. However, Min-jun's unique perspective, shaped by years of observing the company from the ground up, proved invaluable. He understood the business in ways that textbooks couldn't teach, seeing connections and inefficiencies that others missed. Jae-wook found himself looking forward to the weekly training reports, not just for Min-jun's progress, but for the fresh insights he brought to familiar problems. The young man's suggestions for improving employee satisfaction and operational efficiency showed a wisdom that came from genuine experience, rather than theoretical knowledge. During lunch breaks, Min-jun often found himself alone, still feeling the social distance between himself and his peers. His background made him an outsider in their world of family connections and inherited privilege. Yet he persevered, driven by gratitude for the opportunity and a growing sense that he belonged in this new role. Jae-wook noticed this isolation and began finding reasons to include Min-jun in higher-level meetings, introducing him to department heads and key clients. He watched with satisfaction as Min-jun's natural intelligence and integrity won over even the most skeptical executives. The CEO's attention to Min-jun's development didn't go unnoticed throughout the company, sparking rumors and speculation about their relationship. Some whispered about favoritism, while others recognized it as Jae-wook's commitment to merit-based advancement. 6 months into the program, Min-jun had established himself as one of the most promising trainees in the company's history. His presentations were thorough and insightful, his analyses sharp and practical. More importantly, he had retained the humility and kindness that had first caught Jae-wook's attention. During a late evening at the office, as they reviewed quarterly reports together, Jae-wook found himself sharing more than professional insights. The quiet intimacy of the empty building seemed to invite honesty, and he spoke about his own lonely rise to power, the isolation that came with inherited wealth and responsibility. "I never had to prove myself the way you have," he admitted, looking out at the city lights below. "Everything was handed to me, the education, the connections, the position. Sometimes I wonder if I've earned any of it." Min-jun listened with the same careful attention he brought to everything, then spoke with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Earning something isn't just about starting from nothing, sir. It's about what you do with what you're given. You could have ignored what happened to me, but you chose to act. That says everything about who you are." The simple wisdom in Min-jun's words struck Jae-wook profoundly. Here was someone who had every reason to be bitter about life's inequities, yet chose instead to see the good in others. The contrast with his own cynicism was both humbling and inspiring. As they worked side by side, Jae-wook began to recognize feelings that went beyond professional mentorship. Min-jun's presence brought a peace to his life that he hadn't realized was missing, a sense of purpose that transcended corporate success. The company's annual gala approached, a glittering affair where Seoul's business elite gathered to network and celebrate. Jae-wook traditionally attended alone, his status as one of the city's most eligible bachelors, making him a target for ambitious socialites and their calculating parents. This year, he surprised everyone by asking Min-jun to accompany him as his guest. The invitation was extended professionally. Min-jun had contributed significantly to a major deal that would be announced at the gala, but both men understood the deeper significance of the gesture. Min-jun's transformation was complete as he stood beside Jae-wook in the grand ballroom, his confidence now matching his elegant appearance. The whispers that followed them were impossible to ignore, but Min-jun had learned to carry himself with the quiet dignity that had always been his strength. As the evening progressed, Jae-wook found himself watching Min-jun navigate conversations with industry leaders, his genuine interest in people and natural intelligence making him a compelling presence. The young man who had once been invisible was now commanding attention and respect. During a quiet moment on the terrace, away from the crowd's scrutiny, Jae-wook finally voiced what had been growing in his heart for months. "You've changed my life," he said simply, his usual corporate composure replaced by raw honesty. "Not just professionally, but personally. You've reminded me what it means to have integrity, to find purpose beyond profit." Min-jun turned to face him, his eyes reflecting the city lights and something deeper. "You saved me," he replied quietly. "Not just from that humiliation, but from a life of believing I wasn't worth saving." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Jae-wook's position as CEO and Min-jun's role as his protege created complications that extended far beyond personal feelings. The corporate world was unforgiving of relationships that blurred professional lines, especially when they involved such disparate levels of power. Min-jun was the first to address the elephant in the room. "I know this is complicated," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know what people will say, what they'll think. I don't want to damage what you've built or compromise the opportunity you've given me." Jae-wook appreciated the younger man's consideration, but it only reinforced his growing certainty about his feelings. Here was someone who put others' welfare before his own desires, who understood sacrifice and responsibility in ways that most people never would. "I've spent my entire life making decisions based on what others expected," Jae-wook replied, stepping closer. "I've followed every rule, met every obligation, built everything I was supposed to build, but I've never felt as alive as I do when I'm with you." The weight of their mutual confession settled around them as they stood on the terrace, the gala's music and laughter providing a distant soundtrack to their private moment. Both men understood that moving forward would require courage and a willingness to face scrutiny from a world that might not understand their connection. Min-jun reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing against Jae-wook's hand. The simple touch carried the weight of everything they couldn't yet say aloud, all the possibilities and challenges that lay ahead. 1 year later, Min-jun stood in his own office on the 40th floor, his nameplate reading Director of Operations in elegant script. The journey from janitor to executive had been remarkable, but it was the personal transformation that mattered most. He had learned to see himself through Jae-wook's eyes, not as someone who didn't belong, but as someone whose perspective was invaluable. Their relationship had evolved carefully, built on mutual respect and genuine affection that transcended their professional roles. The corporate world had eventually accepted what they couldn't deny, that their partnership, both personal and professional, strengthened the company in ways that quarterly reports couldn't measure. Jae-wook appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the soft smile that was reserved only for Min-jun. The CEO, who had once seemed untouchable, had revealed himself to be simply a man who had been waiting for someone to see past his wealth and position to the person beneath. "Ready for the board meeting?" Jae-wook asked, though his tone suggested he was more interested in the quiet moment they were sharing than the corporate obligations ahead. Min-jun nodded, straightening his tie with hands that no longer trembled with uncertainty. He had learned that belonging wasn't something that could be given or taken away. It was something that came from within, from knowing your own worth and refusing to let others diminish it. As they walked toward the conference room together, Min-jun reflected on the cruel prank that had inadvertently changed his life. What had been intended to humiliate him had instead revealed his strength, brought him to Jae-wook's attention, and ultimately led to a love that neither man had expected to find. The janitor, who had once been invisible, had become impossible to ignore, not through grand gestures or dramatic transformations, but through the quiet power of remaining true to himself, even when the world tried to make him feel small.